Hi everyone, I'm going to tell you a story today. It's a sad story to begin with, but I'm hoping that it may have a happy ending. So, it's an introduction to Scholix, and the story starts with an access portal, a data access portal. I think it's very far away, somewhere in Australia on the other side of the planet, and they make a number of data sets available in this portal. So there's, you can see at the bottom there, dataset D, which is one of their prize publications, and they're pretty happy. Meanwhile, a long way away, so maybe somewhere in Europe, let's say somewhere in Italy, there's a journal of studies, and it publishes articles, and you can see there it's published the article A. The great news is that article A has mentioned dataset D from
We cannot hear you now. It seems that we have a connection problem. It seems that we have a connection problem, so just wait for Adrian to come back. He's trying to connect. Let's give him 3 minutes. Okay, I will make Adrian a presenter again. He's back. So, Adrian, can you hear me? Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Welcome back.
Okay, I apologize.
Now we cannot see you, but it depends. If you believe that we have connection problems, we may not use the camera as you prefer.
I think it's okay now.
Okay, perfect.
Oh, right. I apologize about that. There was a plot twist there where I apologize. All right, now, so where were we? Yes, the Journal of Studies published an article A, and they made a reference to the dataset D. Well, that's very good because that's exactly what the data access portal wanted. They were publishing this data so that people would use it and create new research based on that. A very good outcome. However, there is a problem. The data portal has no idea that it was published, and how on earth would they find out that people have been using their data? So the manager of the data access portal starts up a little project and says, okay, we need to search the internet, we need to get access to journals, we need to build tools to mine the literature to find any references to our datasets. So off they go and spend quite a bit of their time and effort in getting access, full text access to some particular journals, searching where they can, building, in Australia we say building with a piece of string and a coat hanger, one-on-one kind of cottage industry arrangements in order to try and build something. And over a number of years, they build that up and they can get a partial view of where the data is being used in publications. Sorry. So the problem is there are lots of data centers, as you can see on the right there. That's not the only data center in the world, and there are quite a lot of them. And each data center is asking the same question. And there's lots of journals. And there's lots of journal articles. So there's quite a lot of searching to do. Crossref has 18 million pieces of literature registered, and that's not all of the scholarly communication. So this is quite a messy thing where there's lots of data centers and lots of journals and people trying to find out where data has been used. Okay, so let's just pause that story there. That was a little bit of a sad outcome in the first part of our story, but we'll come back. There's another character in the story, and it's a journal. That journal is also a very long way away somewhere in Australia, let's say. Now, as journals do, they publish, and it's published an article. What they don't know is a very long way away in Australia, there is a data center who have received a data set. Someone has deposited a data set in that data center, and they've included a little reference to say, actually, this data set underpins a journal article, and it's that journal article A from that journal that we looked at in the bottom corner. So there we are. The journal has some published literature, but they have no idea that actually someone has deposited the data set that underpins that journal article in a data center a very, very long way away. So the journal says, right, we need to find out about somehow or another from these different data centers whether they have any data that underpins the literature that's already published in our journals. So again, they start these one-on-one, they try and guess what kind of major data centers might be holding information or might hold data that underpins the journal articles. So again, they go through quite a bit of hard work here, trying to, let's say, guess which kind of data centers may have stuff, and then having negotiations, one-on-one arrangements, then some kind of, potentially some software tool to get this information. Of course, the problem, as we saw before, that's not the only journal in the world. There are lots of journals. And all those journals potentially are trying to get all that same information, and there's lots of these one-on-one individual cottage industry information exchange. So again, that's a fairly messy place that we've got to in our story. So we have two parallel narratives here, and both of them have not been a very satisfying ending so far. So that's the intermission, if you like. Enter in Act 2. Amongst all these actors, an initiative called Scholix has been started, and it is a joint initiative that involves publishers, data centers, service providers. You can see some of them there. DataSite, Crossref are there. Some of the big journal publishers. The working group is sponsored by the Research Data Alliance and by the World Data System. So what they thought, okay, surely we can do something better. The first thing they said, well, let's all start to have a shared idea of what it is that we're talking about here. So the working group set upon some very, a conceptual model. What is it that we're talking about? It's a link between two research objects. There is a relationship. The relationship probably is that one of them cites the other one, or one of them is underpinned by the other. And certain people provide that information. So that is a fairly basic step, but it's always good if you want to start to exchange information to really be quite clear about what the concepts are, what the fundamental concepts are. When trying to gather this information in a more systematic way, we realized that there were some very useful members of the working group who already receive information about data sets and their relationships to journal articles, in that case DataSite, or a big community organization like Crossref that already receives information about the linkages between journals and other journals, but also journals and data. So already there, and OpenAir collects information, aggregates information from institutional repositories from around the world. So it occurred that there are these sort of natural hubs of information. If we're trying to build an information system that was more efficient, then we could leverage off these existing natural communities or natural hubs of information. So all that would be required then, if these three players and other large community hubs naturally aggregated that information, then all that remains is to exchange in a very bulk way, in a very wholesale manner, to exchange the information between these hubs. That means that the interoperability happens a bit simply. Only between three very large hubs do you need to have interoperability. So the working group then worked on an information model. We saw a conceptual model to begin with. Then the working group started working on a conceptual model that said, okay, how would you encode that kind of information into an information model? And so you can see some of the details there. We won't go into all of that, but again, the source object is, let's call that a journal article. The target object might be a data set that is referenced by that journal article, and there's all sorts of information there. So on top of that aggregation of information, then OpenAir provides another kind of function in the Scholix ecosystem, it provides something called the DLI service, which is a data literature interlinking service, which pulls together that information from the Scholix participants, the big hubs, and provides a query interface so that now there's a way of querying that larger pool of information. So, given now what the Scholix initiative has been setting in place, now let's revisit some of those stories that we were looking at earlier. Now, do you recall the journal in the bottom left, the orange journal there, which published an article A? And there was some data in a data center a very long way away, which knew that it was the underpinning data for that journal article. In this new system, what happens? So let's take an example, a real life example here from Scopus, which is not a journal itself, but it aggregates information from that it receives from journals. Let's see what might happen in this new scenario. So Scopus is an abstract and indexing database. I've just added then a new player in there that's pulling information from journals, but the idea is similar. So now Scopus has that article A, and it's making a query. Okay, does anyone know any data that might be related to this article? So it sends that query into the Scholix world, into the DLI service, and gets a reply. Yes, there is a dataset D, and it is related to that article. That's a happier ending for our story. What about the other? So now, when you go to the Scopus web page, as you pull up the Scopus information for that journal article, you can now see there's a new little card of information called Related Research Data, and there it is. The data set comes from the University of Adelaide. It's molecular simulations of protein and peptide absorption. And so that's a pretty happy ending. So that little card is now available on a Scopus article page. What about the other story that we had? Do you remember the data access portal in Australia that had published its dataset D? And somebody in the Journal of Studies had written an article and actually based a lot of their conclusions on that data. But we had a very sad ending or a very messy ending to that story previously. Now with the new system, what would happen? So here we are in GenBank. So that's I'm giving you a new example here of a database or a data center. GenBank has information on this particular reference sequence. Now I must say that I know nothing about genomics. This one seems to be a data set about mice, a reference sequence about mice. You'll notice it has its sequence number there. Now, that data center can query the service, and it gets a match saying, does anyone, were the query that was sent off saying, here's our data set, is there any journal articles that have reference to that data set? So the match came back, a very happy ending for that particular data center. And here it is. It was actually an article in an Elsevier journal. We can see it here in Science Direct. It's in vitro functional characterization of feline IgGs. I think I better stop there before I make a fool of myself. But there was a very nice outcome there, much cleaner. So there we are. There's a new way of, those examples are real examples with the Scholix information at the moment. I should give a little proviso, a little warning that this is an initiative that is getting started. We're bringing together some of the big players, but so that it's not comprehensive by any means at the moment. However, as you'll see, I think it's a system that can work a lot clearer. So how would you get information into this system? If you were a data site data center, remember we said that there were these natural hubs of information. So let's say that you are already registering data sets with datasite. The datasite metadata has, as you can see here, a little related identifier, and you can use the relationship type, for example, is cited by, and give, here is an example of a DOI. And that's a very neat way of just including that information in the metadata that you're already providing through to datasite. If you were a journal and you wanted to get, you had some information about the links between your journals and datasets, and you wanted to get that into this Scholix ecosystem, then again, you must already be providing some information through to Crossref. You're providing metadata about the journal and the links and citations in it already. So you can use exactly that same kind of metadata. In fact, there are two different types you can use, the relationship or a citation, but you can see the link at the bottom there. If you're interested, then you can follow that link and find out. The take-home message is that you don't need to do anything new. This information can just be included in your existing metadata feed to Crossref. What if you're an institutional repository or a data center that provides information through to OpenAir? Again, very good news. You don't need, there's no new sort of schema or information model that needs to be, that you need to get your head around. You're already providing information through to OpenAir. If it's information about a piece of literature, then you can give a dataset reference and you can see the information there. If you're a dataset, you can equally use a similar model to the datasite metadata. All that information is again on that URL at the bottom of that slide. Again, in those three examples, we're leveraging existing information flows. There's no new Scholix scheme or anything involved in getting your information into the Scholix ecosystem. So here we are. Data centers can send information through to datasite and OpenAir, as can institutional repositories, and journals can send that information through to Crossref. And through this working group, we are open to other communities who may not be covered by these kind of things. If you're one of those, then by all means contact us, and we'd be very, very happy to include you in the working group. How would you get information from the Scholix ecosystem? So if you're wanting to query about a journal article and wondering what kind of data sets might be related to it, or vice versa, if you're interested in a data set and wondering whether there's any mentions of it in the literature, how would you get that information? The DLI service has a web interface where a human being can go and type those kind of queries. It also has an API, and that's the Swagger API there, where we've been using this procedure here, the one that says get links from PID, though that was the procedure that was being used in those examples where someone provided a PID of a data set or of an article, and then they got a match of another object that was related, a link to that persistent identifier. There are some new services coming on through Crossref and datasite that will really cover off on the DOI side of things, and similar kind of services, but really focused in just on the DOI world. Those services are in beta at the moment and launching as we speak. So if you're at all interested in, especially in getting information from Scholix, then please join our working group, because we are actually designing those services and modifying them right now in ways to make it easier for people to contribute information and to pull information. So if you're at all interested, then it'd be great to join the working group so that we make sure that your use cases and scenarios are covered. There's a two-step process to join the working group. You go to the RDA site, that's the first URL there, and then to join the forum, then there's a Google group to join. So there's the further information. Scholix.org is the website. To join the working group, that's the Research Data Alliance URL. And the third link there is an email. If you just want to send a query, then please contact us there. I hope you think that that was a happier ending to the story. It's probably only the first chapter, in that I think we've assembled the right participants, the right contributors, the right leaders, some very big service providers who are providing the infrastructure behind this. It's the proviso that I did give is that it's in the kind of startup phase. The information in the Scholix partners is not by any means comprehensive, but there is something you can do about that. You can do your little bit to make sure that your information is in there, and to spread the word about other participants in the scholarly communications environment, that they can get involved. Thank you very much.